Hey everyone, it's great to be talking to you again. I'm going to try something new this week. So today it's just me and my Bible, unscripted. So a lot of bands do unplugged sets or just acoustic versions, and that's what I'm going to try here today. We'll see how it goes. And one of the reasons I'm trying it is that I'm trying to break all of my previous records for how many videos I release in one week. Now, you might be thinking you've only ever released one per week, and you are correct. So I think I have a pretty good shot of actually making this happen. But it's just me and my Bible and just thinking through Passion Week, or Holy Week as it's sometimes called, and how that should affect our lives, even here and now as we find ourselves in a situation that none of us ever planned for, in a situation that is maybe challenging for you where you're at. And so I want to encourage you with just a couple of thoughts for Maundy Thursday. And so I'm actually recording this on Tuesday and I'll release it on Thursday. Now, Maundy Thursday is the day that Jesus was. Arrested on. And so we, of course, know that Jesus and the disciples met in the upper room for the Last Supper. And prior to that, there's a pretty interesting story. And it's really something that I've been thinking through as I think through what Christians should be recognized by and for during this time, especially of the coronavirus, and not being able to be together or be as involved in each other's lives in physical ways that we otherwise would have been. So, John 13 is the text, and I want to just point out Jesus is serving. And so Christians should be recognized by serving. We'll see that very clearly in the text itself as Jesus says, I've done this, excuse me, I've done this for you, and I'm leaving you an example that you should do it for others. So let me read John chapter 13 for you here. John 13, and I'm going to read verses 1 through 17. So it was just before the Passover feast. Jesus knew that the time had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he now showed them the full extent of his love. The evening meal was being served, and the devil had already prompted Judas Iscariot, son of Simon, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. And after that he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. And he came to Simon Peter, who said to him, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? Jesus replied, You do not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand. No, said Peter, you shall never wash my feet. Jesus answered, Unless I wash you, you have no part with me. Then, Lord, Simon Peter replied, Not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well. Jesus answered, A person who has had a bath needs only to wash his feet. His whole body is clean, and you are clean, though not every one of you. For he knew who was going to betray him, and that was why he said not everyone was clean. When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. Do you understand what I have done for you? He asked them. You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. I tell you the truth, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. So the first thing that just kind of stuck out to me from that passage as I was reading it this morning is that Jesus saw a need and he met a need. So in that culture, if you were going to be a guest at someone's house, when you got to that person's house, you would be met at the door by the lowest of the servants, the lowest of the slaves, and that person would wash your feet for you. Of course, Israel is a place where there's a lot of dust, and if you're walking across fields, your feet would get dirty. And they wore often in those days open-toed sandals. And so as you came to a house as a sign of hospitality, as a sign of service, excuse me, you would have your feet washed. And it wasn't just for you because you would be reclining at a table, not sitting at a table like we think of today, but reclining at a table with other people. And so that you would have washed feet would also be a benefit to those around you. And so this would have happened as soon as you got to the house. But Jesus and his disciples are not at someone's house, they're actually in a rented space. And so no one had been willing to take upon the role of lowest servant, and so everyone showed up at the dinner table with dirty feet. And Jesus knows this, and it's no coincidence. It's not a something that he overlooked at first, and now he's realized it. He planned that this would take place at this specific time. But the meal has been served, and there's roasted lamb. There's bitter herbs that are being eaten. There's unleavened bread, among other things. And Jesus gets up. He interrupts his meal. And he interrupts the meal of those around him too in doing this. And he takes off his outer cloak and he wraps a towel around his waist and he gets water and he goes around and begins to wash the feet of the disciples. And so Jesus saw a need. Maybe he smelled a need, I don't know. But he saw a need and he met that need. And so that's one of the things, even at our house, that we are trying to help Jack and someday will to learn is to be always looking for needs, to see needs, to take the initiative in looking for them and listening for them, hearing what people are saying, looking for ways that you can serve others, and then actually doing it. So Jesus saw a need and he met a need. A second thing that stood out to me is that nothing is below Jesus. And so there is some sort of incredulity here in Peter as Jesus gets to Peter. And maybe Jesus started across the room and he worked his way around to Peter. Peter would have been one of the disciples that's sitting closer to Jesus. We don't know exactly what the seating order would have been for all of the disciples, but it seems like Peter later on is able to pass a message to Jesus. And so Peter is kind of surprised at what is taking place. Now, earlier in the Gospels, Jesus is overhearing the disciples' conversation, and they're arguing about who's going to be the greatest. Some of them even have decided to take it upon themselves, and with the help of their mother, they've asked Jesus to let them be number one and number two in the kingdom. And so the disciples are having this argument about who's going to be the greatest, and none of them think that serving, being the slave, the voluntary servant, is going to be the way to true greatness. And Jesus sets aside his garment. He takes up the towel, he grabs the water, and he begins to perform the functions of the lowest servant. And then he tells them that this is what he has done for them, and he wants them to do this for others. And so nothing is to be below Christians. If you are serving someone, there's nothing that should really be off limits. So maybe you volunteer to help someone around their house, and the first thing they ask you to do is to scrub the toilet. And you're thinking, yeah, it's not really one of my things I want to be doing. But Jesus' example of nothing being below him would cause you, I hope, to go and to scrub that toilet as if you're scrubbing it for Jesus. And there's so many different ways that we can apply that, but nothing below you is really important. Now, as I thought about that, I was reminded of a story I heard about one of the professors actually that I had in college and seminary. His name was Bob Domikos. He was one of my favorite professors because he was just so practical in all of his teaching. And oftentimes we get out of class early, which never hurt. But there was a story when he was the interim president for a time of Faith Baptist Bible College, and there was a visitor that came to the school, and they were looking for the president, and he wasn't in his office. And so they found someone out mowing the yard, and they said, "Hey, where is the president? I'd like to talk to him." And the person mowing the yard said, "Oh, he'll be back at such and such a time. Why don't you stop back then?" And this visitor did just that. He came back to the president's office, and to his surprise, there was the man who he had talked to earlier who was mowing the yard. The president, Bob Domikos, was mowing the yard. Now, Bob loves to mow. That's one of the things he's known for. But nothing was below him. He was willing to sit behind a desk and make important decisions for this whole school, and he was willing to jump out there on a mower and just mow. And I thought that's really cool, and that's always stuck with me. And Jesus set that example that it didn't matter who you were. if you were one of his followers, you would be willing to serve in any way that you might find. And so if you see a need, it doesn't matter what it is, look for ways to meet that need. And then the last thing that I wanted to mention is that Jesus set us an example. And so here's what the text said. After he finishes this, he sits down and he asks a Jesus question. He says, "What did I just do? What's the significance? What's the meaning?" And here's the explanation from Jesus. He says, "Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you." And so, of course, as we think about how Christians should be recognized, we've talked about how they can be recognized by their love or their hope or their longing. We're going to talk about ways, other ways in the future, their thoughtfulness and their care, their commitment to the word. There's a lot of things that I have on the list to talk about. But among those things, Jesus says, "I've set you this example that you should wash one another's feet." Really, that you should serve one another and that nothing should be off limits, as it were, out of bounds for your serving. We shouldn't say, "Yeah, I'll serve as long as it's in these ways that I really like. I'll serve as long as I get to use my gifts and I don't have to come out of my comfort zone." No, Jesus says serving is what matters. And I've set this example for you, and that's what you should do. No questions asked. And so really just thinking through, how can you be known for your serving during this coronavirus time where people are sheltering inside in many places? There really aren't many ways for you to contact other people physically or directly. What are some ways that you could be serving? Of course, you can be praying for your fellow church family. You can be praying for people in our community, whether it's people making decisions for the whole city, service members like our law enforcement or our fire or ambulance crew. You can be praying for small businesses. That would be such a neat thing to do that maybe none of us have thought about before. Praying for the small businesses that are struggling at this time. Pray for those community members that have lost their jobs, perhaps, or those who are working extra hours, or those who are in harm's way, as it were, as they might come into contact on a regular basis with people who have COVID-19. So praying is a really important one that you can be doing. A second one is just be talking to people, contacting people. Now, again, we want to be careful to follow the guidelines that have been laid out for us and the whole social distancing thing and 6 feet apart, things like that. But you can send a text, you can make a phone call, you can send an email, you can message through various social media sites. There's all kinds of ways that you can contact people. And as you contact people, I encourage you to think through why you're contacting them. Is it so that you feel like you've crossed it off your list, that you've done your responsibility? Or do you really care and really want to know what's going on in their life and look for ways to serve and encourage them? And so as you talk with them, why you're talking to them will really dictate what you do and what you say. So I've always been encouraged by Jim Tillotson. Some of you know him. He's a friend of mine. He's been to our church before. And whenever you're in a conversation with Jim, he really often controls the conversation, and not in a bad way. He controls it because he's always asking questions of you. And I've always been encouraged because he always remembers the answers that you give. And so as you talk with others, ask good questions. Ask thoughtful, pre-planned, careful questions that kind of help you to understand what they're going through, what the struggles are that they have, what the needs are that they have. And I'd really encourage you to remember what they say. And so that means that you'll probably have to do less talking about you and what's going on in your life. But that's a really good way to find out what people's needs are so that you can see the need and then meet the need. And we have a few others. I just jotted them down over here. Pick something up for them. Maybe you know that they need something. You've learned that so-and-so is out of these few staples. And so you just go to the store, grab them, drop them off. Maybe it's anonymous. Maybe you just pop in. Maybe you write them a card, whatever it might be. Or perhaps ask them, "Hey, what can I get for you the next time I'm out?" There's all kinds of ways that you can serve in that capacity. Other ideas, other examples. Maybe you have a plethora of toilet paper. Hopefully, you weren't one of the hoarders, but perhaps like Julie and I, we had been trying out Amazon Prime subscription service. And so we kind of were set for toilet paper because We had a lot that we were, getting in the days leading up to the virus. Maybe that's you, and maybe you're able to share that toilet paper with someone else. Maybe you can start a new tradition instead of taking toilet paper and throwing it up in the trees and around around someone's house. You can just leave it on their doorstep. There's all kinds of ways to be creative, and I think creativity, which will come out of your personality, which will come out of your thinking and your thoughtfulness, the time spent to figure out ways to serve others. I think that's really the coolest part about serving others is you get to be creative in how you do it. So the encouragement for you is that Jesus set us an example. He saw a need and he met a need. Nothing was below him. And then he tells his followers, this is how people will know that you're my followers, by the love that you have for one another, and love worked out through serving. And so Jesus, at the very end, just one last verse, he says to them, now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. So I'd encourage you, even on this day, Thursday, actually Tuesday the recording, but Thursday the release date, to think about ways that you can serve those around you, whether it's your church family, your community, your neighbors. Just think through various ways that you can demonstrate that you are one of Christ's followers by serving. And I want you to know that I'm going to be praying for you as you think about that. And of course, with many of the things that come from out of this virus and the time that we spent apart, I really am concerned and desirous of having the things that we're learning go further than the time that we're apart. I don't want us to just go back to business as usual, to get back into the ruts that many of us were in before the virus hit, to get back to our comfort zones. I want us to take and learn from this and for it to change forever the way we live. So I'm praying for you as you seek to find ways to serve others, to be creative and thoughtful, and to show that you are a follower of Jesus by how you serve. So go out there and be recognized by your serving. We'll see you later.